Next up, Mr. Jack Linneman. Fashion statement of before his time. I'm almost afraid to think of what that might look like were it being done with today's fashion standards that we're seeing on the internet in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Jack moved here from Sacramento, California in 1951. He was a musician, played dobro and steel. He was hired by Starday, by Tommy Hill, and played on sessions with his son, Billy Linneman. Billy's still active in the industry. And while I was researching this, I was having a little bit of trouble finding some information, but I finally stumbled across a reference to him as Hoss Linneman, which led me down another rabbit hole to a book. And found the book on Amazon. I thought, well, I need to buy that. And it was a little more than I wanted to pay for a few lines. But we have a research author in our building. And I called him up and I said, hey, have you ever heard of this book? He said, well, who wrote it? And I said, yeah. He said, oh, yeah, I got it here. I said, well, can you find it? Because if you've ever been in a research author's office, you know what a catastrophe it can be. And by the time I got upstairs, he already had the book out for me. And Jack was a recording engineer and also built studios and also built equipment. And the funny story out of this sequence of events here, where I'm leading you to, he developed a reverb unit, an echo unit that was used on a number of albums, and to the point that Columbia Studios and RCA Studios started calling and finding out, what is this reverb unit that you're using? We're interested in it. And he said, and so Jack said, well, it's one that I built. Well, we're interested in buying them. So here came the ideas that, well, there's a business here. And Jack flew by the seat of his pants in building this. He said, well, I'll have to figure it out, and I'll make them. So he sat down and took it apart, and then didn't remember what he did, how to get it back together. So all those dreams of another reverb unit that we could be having as legacy equipment today went by the wayside. And that's not unusual for us that are in this industry to do stuff by the seat of our pants and then forget what we did in the end of that. So Hilltop is now Nashville's longest running recording studio. Still very active, and we'll hear from the owner of that in the video.
My father, during World War II, worked as a civilian for the Air Force in Sacramento. That was his day job, club night job. And he had a crew, and they would repair the airplanes that they brought in from the Pacific, where they'd been shot down. And so he helped repair them. And then he was crew chief, so he had to go fly them. He said, I never had a problem except for one time. He said, I got in this P-38 and I started up, and as soon as I started it up, it caught on fire. I bailed out, ran, the plane and the hangar all burned up. That was a close call there.
Well, Jack was a very comfortable guy to be around. He was funny, you know, soft-spoken kind of guy, and knowledgeable. I never remember Jack, getting mad at anybody and yelling or anything like that. So he was a comfortable guy to be around. So I think, to sum it up, Jack was just a nice guy and a talented guy. So, I owe my whole audio career to Jack, because he was that one guy. I remember way back in the phone book, he was the one guy that I don't think if he had answered the phone that day, I don't know if I'd be doing this today, because I really didn't have credentials at the time or anything that should have put me in this position. So between Jack and God, that put me at Hilltop. But Jack gave me the chance, so I owe him a lot for that.
He was kind of like me, used his hands to speak, and if he went out in the studio, all he had to do was walk out there and go to the steel guitar player.
What's that mean?
That means chink, a little, I think a chime chink. And they all knew what he meant by going out there and doing that. My father was a character for those who got to be around him for a length of time.
And he's a great ping pong player. He could absolutely whip my tail. I tried and he was much older than me, but I could not play against the guy. We had a ping pong table set up here at Hilltop, and he always wanted to play ping pong. You know, we weren't doing a session or something or whatever. He said, "Hey, let's go play some ping pong." And of course, here I am paid. I'm on the payroll, so yeah, I'll play ping pong with you all day long. And man, it was frustrating though because he was so good.
He was always dabbling, and there's a good and a bad part about that. The good part is he would dabble in stuff and he'd end up with something that was really good. The bad part of that is he'd dabble in the stuff that was really good and get 95% done and wouldn't finish. One of our consoles had, I may have a picture, it was on aluminum frame and it had plastic where all the graphics were on the back underside. The whole console got done, but like that black piece right there, he never got a sheet. No. So right there was a piece of aluminum shining at you.
But Jack was also one of those guys who just had natural talent, you know, not just in audio, but electronics. It just blew me away. Here was a guy that could design circuits in his mind and just scratch them out on a piece of paper. And you could just say, you know, I wish we had this thing that did this. And he goes, oh, okay, well, that would do this. And here's some capacitors, resistors, whatever it takes. He would always show me these schematics on paper. And of course, he was always so far above my head anyway. I would just act like, yeah, that's cool. I really didn't know what he was talking about, but it probably would have worked, I'm sure.
He built our first thing was we were Universal Audio dealers. So we built a small console with a round knob plug-in things. Was our first console. And then he built another one himself. Beats me how he did it all.
So Jack was a genius at that kind of electronic design. It was amazing. So I always admired him to do that kind of stuff. But anyway, and getting back to audio and his mixing abilities, he was very good. You know, he was what we call around here the king of the two-track recording, you know. Of course, we had multi-track, but, you know, we'd have groups that would come in and he'd record them live to two-track, go home at the end of the day with your mixes, you know, in your hand. But he was very good at that. He had a good, keen sense of, excuse me, a keen sense of, you know, how it goes, how to balance things. Of course, he was a dobro player, a very good one, and made a few albums back in the day. So he was a musician. So he engineered like part of the band, if you will. He just felt like, you know, when things would come up and go down and how to balance things and make things sound good. I think a lot of people that might not have known his engineering and all that stuff would just say, man, what a great guy. He's a nice guy. I always liked Jack. You hear that a lot. He's a fun guy. People that do know about Jack's audio career would say, you know, he was a good engineer. He could really mix a two-track album or a designer. He knew circuits. He knew how to do stuff. So pretty interesting fellow. So I think, yeah, he's going to have a good legacy.
A lot of good times and a lot of good memories out of the studio here.
His son, I'm going to put Johnny Rosen on alert. Johnny, where are you? Johnny's still here? There he is. Billy is hung up in traffic or something. Billy didn't make it in today. So accepting for Jack Linneman is Johnny Rosen. Thank you.
Yep. My name is Johnny Rosen, and my very first studio job was with Jack Linneman. And what they didn't tell you in there, he was in a group called Waldo and Purd. He was Purd. I'd never heard of a musician named Purd at that point. But he was a great musician. He worked out at Starday, and Starday was a really unusual place in that it was a little incestuous group of people that worked together over and over again, got to know each other, same group of musicians, same people running the record company. And there was a couple of characters. One of them was Tommy Hill. And I don't know what Tommy's background was, but he had a great Ford antique car, and he had a briefcase with 2 pistols in it in case somebody took one away. And Jack could make friends with anybody. He was just one of those guys that somehow or other, if you didn't like him, something was really wrong with you. And he just did a great job. You know, he Hilltop, they talked about it. And the echo chamber gadget that they referred to in there basically was a ripoff of an EMT, but he built it with all sorts of strange parts that he found. And one of them was a little Radio Shack wall resonator. It was a speaker magnet without a cone. And it had a little screw. And you screwed it into your wall, and the whole wall would become a loudspeaker. And that's what he used as the driver for the echo chamber. And it really sounded great. The other thing that Jack did that was unusual, it was the only console that I'd seen. Well, I hadn't seen many consoles anyway, but it was the first console I'd seen. And for many years, this was true. He had monitor switching in the console. Before that, everybody had to switch over on the tape recorder to hear the right thing you want to hear. He had that built in. There was a little switch panel over on the side that he built. It wasn't labeled, you know, the not quite complete thing. But it worked. And he was a brilliant guy with great musical skills. And he was a forward thinker. That later became the concept of cell sync remote controls. Years later, you know, it's kind of cool. And Starday was an unusual place. Jack's working there. And he says one day, he says, I need you. We had a 3-track tape recorder and a mono tape recorder at that point, and 1 stereo machine, but nobody used the stereo machine. It was all mono, you know. So he said, you need to play these tapes, but I want you to turn off channels 1 and 3, and some guy's going to come in and want to listen to this lady singing. And I went, okay. It was Charlie Dick right after Patsy had died, and he wanted to listen to her breathing. Those are the kind of things that happen in a small, magical studio that Jack ran and inspired lots of other people. Hilltop was great, too. So on behalf of Billy, who cannot be here, I'm just honored to receive this. I didn't know I was going to do this today, but Jack's the guy that got me started in a 25-year career, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to give Billy Linneman the opportunity to speak for just a moment, if you'd like. He was able to make it in. And Billy, would you like to address us? We've got a wireless somewhere.
Where's the wireless?
For the family, I want to thank everybody. Who knew when we moved to Nashville in '51 that we'd be so involved in the music business? But my father had a thought when the interstate was coming through our old house, and he built the studio long before it opened up, 9 years before, and he had a forethought to think all that out ahead of time. So, and he had a forethought to hire the engineers. I guess y'all went through a list of engineers that we had. And he was a different type person, is all I can really say. And I really appreciate the honor you gave him. Thank you.